On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Amnon Mishor. He is the CTO of Gynger. We're going to be talking about startup and founder resilience. What do I mean by that? Well, a startup has to actually go through a lot of things to get to an end goal, and sometimes that resilience factor is very important, but also the founder, how resilient you are in those difficult times and how you manage and navigate. And Amnon's been through a couple startups. We're going to ask him how he's learned that resilience factor, not just for himself as a founder, but also his startups. Amnon, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, before we start, Gynger, tell everyone what you guys do there.
Gynger is an embedded financing solution for technology purchasing. So if you are, for example, a startup that has a huge AWS bill coming and you pay for your CRM, Salesforce, HubSpot, you name it, and some edtech spend, Gynger can pay the bills on your behalf, and you can extend your cash runway and control your cash by paying us back. And with really good terms. Or if you're a technology vendor, you can offer payment terms built in your bills and in your sales process and so on.
This topic, I think, I'm really excited about it because I think the term resilience has a lot of power. It's very descriptive. People have images of what it means to themselves. When we're talking about startups and founders being resilient, maybe let's define what that means to you so everyone understands the context.
I would start with maybe saying what it's probably not. It's not a defensive, manage the downside type of thing that you need to think about just to make sure that your company, your startup, your business just keep floating or not getting shut down at difficult times. And because people might take that phrase resilience to say, no, I'm just focused on building the next big thing. It's going to be huge, and I just need to think about the upside. If not, it doesn't matter. And the truth is that if you listen to, for example, the Acquired podcast, if you're familiar with them, or even some of the stories on your podcast that I listen to, some of the most successful companies in the world, the biggest brands you ever heard of, when you actually heard their stories, you realize that each one of them has been several times in existential risk situations. And they were running out of money. They were losing the biggest client, the biggest partner. They had issues in the board, you name it. So none of these the best companies in the world would exist if they would not been resilient. So being resilient is not about building a company just to survive. It's about giving you the ticket, the chance to potentially build the biggest company. So that's number one for me. That what it is about. Yeah, it's a must-have condition.
I guess it's interesting, and obviously people can have heard of stories of companies being built within very difficult situations, very difficult times. Right now, obviously, the last 2 years, 18 months, funding has been really hard. It's not the easiest. It's not 2010, but it's not easy, right? It's not the easiest of environments. When you think about a founder, obviously, they're trying to execute of a startup. They're trying to already execute. They already have an uphill battle, right? They already have an uphill battle because the idea has to be proven. They have to execute the idea. When the macro environment then isn't as favorable, that forces founders to think differently than when times are great. Talk to us a little bit about that difference. When times are not good and founders have to execute within that environment, and obviously this is within the context of resilience, what do they have to do differently?
I'll speak from a very personal point of view, as my two last startups have been formed in pretty difficult times, or post-crisis, post-bubble bursts environment. And I would jump to the bottom line, and I would never take it back. I feel it's the perfect condition to stick to the key principles of building a resilient company. And I will explain. But before I get to that, I would definitely say that the obvious challenge is what you we're saying that it's really hard to raise money. So it's really hard to get the ticket to play, to get some investor to bet on you, and just to demonstrate that aspect. Just story, sort of stories. My own stories. I was pitching investors, and usually when you pitch your investor, at some point they ask you about how are you different than company X, and in good times, this company X is probably doing well, and it's like had built a name for themselves in the market, and you need to somehow convince that you have a little bit of an advantage, or the market is big enough for both of us, and blah blah blah. After the bubble burst and you're going to raise money, and when they ask you how are you different from company X, this company X just burned hundreds of millions of dollars to their investors and got shut down. And the partner that you've been pitching needs to explain to their partners whether why they're going to do that again and look ridiculous by investing in this thing that's absolutely proven to be a failure, because so many companies got hit and so many companies get shut down, and they will always find this example. So that's obviously the challenge and the hard part in starting a company in difficult times. And I've seen too many, by the way, founders, friends that were forced to compromise on maybe the principal one of building a resilient company in hard time, which is find the right partner to build a company with. So they pitch so many, and eventually, the only investor that will give them money, they will go with, which in the non-ideal settings, because this investor doesn't see eye to eye at all the vision that you build, what you're building. This investor is not a good long-term investor. This investor will be very tough to deal with in difficult times. So all of the things that are important in picking the right investors, this is extremely hard to do when it's a challenging economy. And I would even advise sometimes people to walk away from money and not just go for it if you can't keep some of these principles. But this is the pessimistic side of the answer.
That's really interesting, because as I'm listening, when times are tough, and I guess the expression, if it's broke, don't fix it. When things are easy, you might overlook certain things because things are coming easy, and you're like, why would I focus on this? I'm focused on my priority of growth, or I'm focused on these other things because it's not a problem. When it becomes a problem and you start paying attention to those problems, all of a sudden you're like, well, why are we spending a little bit more here? Why are we can I do this myself? Well, can I save this? Can I make those adjustments? Do we really need these features just because they're on the roadmap? What's the core? And it's interesting that, and I guess it's human nature. I don't think it's founders necessarily. I think if we were to look at the entirety of the macroeconomic situation, everyone, when times are good, go on extra vacations and do all that stuff. As soon as there's a contraction, everyone asks the questions of should I. Those questions that are asked in down terms, those should I's, are they honing the business model better, the culture differently? Because obviously it's forcing the founder to think differently versus when, hey, things are just coming easy, or at least in a better economic climate. That is
100%. And I think you said it well. The contrary is building a startup in a bubble economy, if it's the right term. Even if you're an experienced founder and you know all the principles of building the company right and building it in a resilient way, keep the burn low, and even if you're familiar with all these things, you don't live in an isolated environment, and the environment forces you to compromise. It forces you to pay 50% more to each employee, even if you don't think they're worth it, because otherwise they will just leave to a different company. It forces you to build too many features because your competitors are just raise endless amount of money, and they're just not thinking, just building everything, and your clients are demanding it because they're hearing it from your competitor. So you've been forced to do things that are suboptimal. Marketing, you're forced to spend way too much on stupid events that maybe don't lead you to the right people because you feel your competitors are out there and you have to do it. You have to be partner with all the big, spend too much time in technology partnerships that maybe doesn't bring back much. And it's really hard to stand by and look and all of your well-funded peers doing all these things and be extremely loyal to your principles and say, no, I'm just doing the right things. So for me, building two companies in times that there were ups and downs. At some point, I've been enough time on the road with the company, so things change over time. But at the times where the macroeconomics was tougher and there was less competition, it was more real things out there, and I actually enjoyed the profession called entrepreneurship much more in these times. You feel you're doing it right, yes.
Is one of the factors having to focus on identifying a path to profit? Not that a startup is necessarily, looking to be profitable at a certain immediate date. That's not always the goal. But is some of the pressure and some of this, trying to refactor the business and recalibrate, is that come into the equation more and more when we have these downturns?
I would say not necessarily profit necessarily, because some, as you called out, it's responsible growth is a term that my CEO likes to use a lot, and I like it a lot, because still you're in a growth business. Like your valuation is relative to the growth, and if you're growing well, you probably want to spend more and maybe push the question of profitability. But responsible growth starts with cash management, very much smart. So that's the oxygen. That's the of every company. That's the basics. The nutrition, what keeps everything going. And experienced entrepreneur and smart entrepreneur understands that this is not, cash is not trivial. That this is one of the reasons why I actually really enjoy building Gynger too, because it attacks this core fundamental problem of resilience of companies, which is delay, keep your cash flow as healthy as you can. So you're much more responsible with cash, and you're much more responsible with building the team correctly and the culture and the trust between people, because when there's endless amount of money and a lot of things happen in the market, you're kind of feeding off fumes that maybe are not real. And when the real crisis hits you, when it will come, by definition, then you realize what's real and what's not. And starting to build a trust with your team and suddenly become transparent and telling them the truth, and suddenly making sure processes are very clear and ownership and everyone knows their place. All of these core things that you need to do in one-to-one management courses. It's you better do that all the time, and you better do it from day one. And you don't get distracted when things are tough from the beginning, when you need to earn your meal every single day. Versus, I've seen too many companies that raise money in upturns and bubble times, and they forgot all these core principles. And then the crisis hits, and then 50% of the people are either voluntarily they need to let them go, or and then start to flee the company. Yeah, so I absolutely agree with all those things that you mentioned. Yes.
So you said something interesting. I love the term responsible growth. You mentioned that when times are good, people are engaged in, let's say, suboptimal activities, and you went through and you outlined a number of them. It's interesting because I think engineers are very pragmatic. A lot of trying to solve a problem in a certain way. And when times are tough, they're quite okay to put that lens on and really focus in on that responsible growth. When money's a little bit more easy to get, they can go focus on some of those suboptimal activities that might not have the ROI, but they're being done because the market might indicate it's required. Is there a balance there? Obviously, it sounds like there's a lot of, if you're a founder, there's a lot of FOMO of looking around going, am I doing enough, or should I be doing enough, or should I be doing more? And there's a cycle, there's an economic cycle, however long it stretches, it comes around. But if you're building a business that has going to have a long-spanning growth cycle, is there a better balance that could be found? And is that maybe when you build a business through these rough times, you're building with that in mind because you already know that that's potentially going to be at your doorstep?
My perspective is that I think I've been pretty consistent in the way I'm building my companies without trying to weigh in the things I cannot control, which is the macroeconomics. So I'm sticking to the principles that I'm talking about. Some of them I mentioned, some of them maybe I'll elaborate more. And knowing that these are kind of universal, and we are such a small company and such a big economy that you can't control the macro. Let it be what it will be. So maybe the market will pay 2x for the stuff that you're really good at and what you're building, and maybe they will pay 10x because right now the valuations are much higher. Maybe the investors will put X amount of money in your company, or maybe you'll put a little bit less. You can't control that much. So therefore, I prefer to focus on what I can control and not change that too much relative to the economy, unless again some things happen, like competitors will influence your behavior or stuff like that. But I wouldn't, from the beginning, strategize and saying this is an amazing economy. I'll build a company in one way because I know I'll sell it for $10 billion just because right now the valuation is so high. Let's just do that. It's so volatile. It's one of the most unhealthy things I think for a founder to do, which is literally bet, think like a hedge fund and bet on the economy and take a strategy, change your strategy, your product strategy, your the way you build your company just because you feel you understand what the macroeconomics look like.
I love that. And I know some VCs listen, so they might not like this next question, but I'm curious. I'm going to ask, obviously you mentioned growth is important. Every startup is looking for growth. You're looking for valuation growth. You're almost rewarded to a certain extent in terms of those milestones. We glorify it. We talk about the ones that hit a unicorn status. That's a marker people strive for. And obviously, when you're focused potentially on that, right? And I guess I'm not talking general. I'm talking generally. There's going to be some that don't care about this. Some are just focused on building a business. But it's really hard. You hear about these companies just became unicorn, and we have a list, and it's. I think every founder would love to hit that list. Is there a little bit of outside pressure when it comes to those conversations of, hey, or in the back of a founder's mind of hitting those milestones, hitting that kind of level of, let's say, personal satisfaction and being responsible, building that resilience? Because I think everything I've heard, I'm like, to build a resilient company, you have to factor some things, but then you also, as a founder, have to work on growth. It's like this split personality where they don't necessarily work with each other, but also then we have these drivers that are like, we need to get to unicorn status. That's going to be great. You're going to put on your LinkedIn, you'll say, but whatever. I'm just kidding, obviously. So, but again, the question really is there are growth factors that force companies to grow. Can you build resilience? Should you be building resilience and worrying about responsible growth, or really, hey, you're a founder, your job is to get to be as big as you can, as fast as you can?
I always stick to the responsible growth. And I feel, and responsible growth means sometimes you do step on the gas when it's responsibly true. You found your product market fit, you have a go-to-market machine working, and you can now hire the next 10 salespeople in one quarter, because every salesperson, the next salesperson you bring will be able to hit the quota very quickly. So sometimes it's the right thing to do, and sometimes you need to hire 5 engineers, 10 engineers immediately to form another group because you're building a new thing. But it's not automatic. It's in many times it's not the right thing to do, and in many times you need to hire slow. Actually, most time I think. So rarely at a point that everything works and you can just grow at all costs. And you need to identify those moments, whether the economy is good or not. Identify your own company's metric and know when it's true. It's actually most of the time not true. Most of the time you hire too quickly. You hire ahead because you know that because you're Excel and the things you told in the board meeting, you believe them instead of believing the actual reality, and then you create problems because you have too many people, or you spend too much money, or People are just not have anything to do because you brought them to do something that doesn't exist yet. You built a customer success team where you didn't sell one deal, stuff like that, early stage problems. So yeah, responsible growth, I think, is always the right thing, state of mind, whatever the economy and whatever the environment is. And responsible sometimes means you can't step on it. You can't push more once you feel this is the right thing to do.
I like the description. I think maybe the question I'll ask is, how do you then define responsible growth? Because if I'm listening, I'm a founder, or I want to be a founder. I'm like, okay, well, when I have that idea and I've got funded, I feel like I need to go as fast as I can because I need to hit these milestones. I need to get an MVP out. I need to put out more features. I need to sell. We need that distribute. All these things. I need to build a funnel. And then obviously responsible growth means there needs to be some marker, some metrics, something I'm measuring whether I should be doing these. Just because, I think what I'm hearing from you is there's all these activities you should, or could rather, you could be doing. The question is if they're growing responsibly, is they may not all happen at the same time. They may happen in different cycles and phases. How do you evaluate that as a responsible growth? So how do you know, what do you need to see to go? In your example, you said, you could hire 10 salespeople and they could all hit their quota and you feel confident about that. What would you have to see? What are you looking for?
Yeah, it's a very wide, it's a question that probably there's a specific answer for each type of the decisions that you need to take. As we said, in sales, there are specific models and metrics that you need to really weigh in. In generally building your team, I kind of highlighted the next hire, how, I tend to do the next hire when I am, or some people already doing the job and being too stretched out, and then I know what I need to hire. I'm not just bringing a person because I feel it. I know exactly what are the things that today needs to be done because I'm doing it myself already and I shouldn't. And then I bring the person to do that. That's one maybe a little tip of how to think about what only hire when you need to do the next hire. Maybe I will highlight the thing that I'm most passionate about as a product innovator and CTO, which is the key question of focus on your product strategy. How to make decisions whether you should build another product or another big feature, or stick to your guns and just hold yourself and just focus on what you're doing. Because that's, I think, another big aspect of responsible growth, because you, generally speaking, or I would say most commonly, or very common, startups will feel that if they build another thing, they will grow faster. They will win some deals that they probably lost because they were missing the feature. They already took the mid-market. They need to go to enterprise. Let's build another thing. They build a really good SaaS experience, but now they think that if they develop an API, like a developer API platform, then they will get other clients. They're building, and maybe I'll give a specific example to demonstrate that. So I've been, my previous company, my previous life, I've been in the MarTech space. And in the MarTech space, a lot of the companies, a lot of the value comes from collecting a lot of data. And then on one hand, so creating really high quality data by collecting it, refining it, unifying it, all this kind of stuff. And on the other side, there's the insights. Like, okay, there's data, but then there's companies that are really good in building insights and building things that will help you make better decisions. And every company that is really, really good at in collecting and building data feels that it's not good enough and they have to deliver the insights. And every company that just delivers insights feels that the core value is data asset is what we need. We're lacking our own data asset. Let's build a data asset as well. And 90% of them are probably making a mistake by not sticking to the superpower that they have. Because it's really, really hard to build a really good insight interfaces that people can actually put into action. It's really, really hard to collect high quality data at scale. And so, and if you're too early and you're not Salesforce, you're not LinkedIn, you're not Microsoft, you're probably too early trying to tackle these two huge problems. And you're diluting your identity. Because the market too. So it's a marketing problem as well. So defocusing too early, I think, is one of the biggest aspects of non-responsible growth, because it means that you need to hire a bit more people. It means your mind share is spread. Your salespeople are confused. You need to have more enablement to sell. Marketing is confused. You need to do more, and you're losing your identity in the market, and you lose your identity among your employees too, because they used to think we are the best data people, and now you tell them we do other things, and once things become tough, they even don't know what we are for here. So this is just an example I personally dealt with a lot, and I've seen so many companies dealing with this example. It probably exists in every single startup, which is the focus question. And there's usually a bias to be not focused enough, and therefore probably not stick to the principle of responsible growth and think that if I just build another thing, I'll grow faster.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's great insight. That's a great example, great use case of how you kind of view that. And I think it's interesting because as I'm listening back in my mind to everything you've said, I feel like part of when, again, you've done this now twice, kind of battling a tough market, it seems to force you to make those decisions, those trade-offs more consciously, because you don't have the luxury of maybe running out of funding and knowing you could potentially get funding easier. So you're kind of forced to be like, hey, I got to have some checks and balances. I cannot build outside these core competencies, because if I don't execute on this, and maybe that's a cornerstone, maybe that is something that really does enable, I think, obviously Uber came out of the 2008 financial crisis. There's a bunch of companies that got funded that are all name brand, and not to say that's the sole reason that these companies got big, but it does force you to make those decisions to consciously find maybe those niches that will help you down the road. Whereas if you have a little bit more liberal option, maybe you don't. Maybe you're like, hey, I will add this product because maybe it does grow our revenue, like you said. That's very interesting. I like that.
Yeah, I can add another. I absolutely agree with what you said. It's actually easier to build. That's why it's easier to build a company when things are tougher out there, because you're less inclined to do those mistakes and think you're invincible and have enough resources out there and get away with all these mistakes of not being focused, not being lean, not all the ABC things that startup people need to understand. The hard part of it is when you are focused and lean, you do need to put up with the existential risk that the one thing that you're doing really well probably has. So every startup that chose to do one thing and they do it really well, there's probably one big thing that if it happens, it kills your startup one day. Legal risk, a huge, the famous, what if Google decides they want to do that? That's a famous question. And I face those risks as well. We're living in the martech space. There's data risk and legal risk about what data you'll be able to collect in the future. Now in the fintech space, a lot of regulation risk, a lot of big entities that can do stuff that can, so it sounds like it's not resilient. Like if I want to be resilient, then just spread my bets and do many things. But I think it's counterintuitively wrong. Again, live with the things you cannot control. Yes, there is an existential to what you do. Just live with it. Be resilient personally and in your life to know that if that happens, fine, you'll find a way out of it. You'll sell a company, maybe less than what you thought or whatever. But don't think that you can mitigate the risk that you cannot control by spreading by hedging, by building too many things, because that probably will diminish your chances. That makes you much less resilient in the 80%, maybe 10% chance that you get wiped out by something you can't control. But in the 90% chance that it won't happen, you want to be in your best shape. So that's something that is hard to sometimes to live with, but that's part of the job.
Absolutely. Amnon, I wanted to thank you for coming on the show and sharing. I mean, tons of great insights, great examples. I love that. Hopefully the audience will reach out if they have any additional questions, just because I'm sure we left a couple things open-ended there. If somebody does want to touch base with you and ask you for advice, or just kind of a little bit further from what we've talked about, is there a good way of touching base with you?
yeah, people like to reach out to me in LinkedIn, Amnon Mishor, CTO of Gynger, or just Amnon, AMNON at Gynger with a Y, .io. And happy to engage with anyone who wants to follow up on anything we talked about or anything else.
Okay, awesome. We'll put that in the show links. Thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a really fun conversation.
Absolutely. All right, that's the end of the episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think this conversation was fantastic. I think the conversation around responsible growth, and obviously when times are tough, you're kind of forced to make those decisions versus when times are not. And obviously Amnon's experience in building two companies in tougher times, very interesting, and how he had to kind of define goals slightly differently and when to go for growth, when not to go for growth. Some great examples, and I appreciate it. Share this episode with somebody else who might find it useful as well. I'd appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.